I am Merrell Williams again on the issue of the uh, incident in Scotland ongoing involving Legionnaires Disease or categorized as Legionnaires Disease. I frequently, as I have been shut up for years without being able to talk, so to speak, in public. Um, I, I do things off the cuff, and sometimes I speak out of turn. So I need to make one correction here. I did make it in writing. It was not Union Carbide who who created freon. Freon was actually created by Dupont, and it's their name brand. There were other companies that created the same kind of chemical which freezes and gives you air conditioning. And so I'm making that correction now. I apologize to you, DuPont. You did it, and Union Carbide, you did. As far as I know, you may have done something else, but you sure didn't do create freon. So my apologies to you. Now, I'm still baffled by the fact that for years, and I'm looking at a picture of Nicola Sturgeon, who is apparently associated with the Scottish health division of determining the numbers, and they're apparently rising. Here's the issue that I have here. When I actually wrote about this, I took the words Brown Williamson's BAT, British American Tobacco, and Scotland's near Britain, so I took the words from the lawyers and the people from especially Brown and Williamson, a subsidiary of British American Tobacco, and they were extremely afraid and so were the other manufacturers, afraid that this was ever going to get out. The fact that there was a gentleman who was a lieutenant commander who had taken some information in his experience of submariners and smoking and freon, and he put this together, and he came up with a confirmation. And although he doesn't appear in the hearings in 1977 on this, on which were about the Legionnaires Disease. Levangi's surrogate does appear, and he talks completely of everything about Lieutenant Commander Levangi had come to the conclusion and was thwarted on several occasions about his examination of the problem. And nobody could come up with anything, but the CDC was going to absolutely determine. In 1976, they absolutely refused to listen to anything that Lieutenant Commander Levangi had to say, and he himself said that he didn't have the bona fides in this area, but nevertheless he knew the expertise and the analysis that had been done in the submariners about Legionnaires, or what we call Legionnaires disease. It wasn't called Legionnaires disease until 1976, when it killed and maimed a number of Legionnaires. But in looking back on the history of this, DuPont had created in the 1930s a refrigerant that came into various large places. It was a very unstable gas. It was a gas that's been used over and over. Now, when the tobacco companies actually realized that this Legionnaires disease could have been caused in some, at least to the extent that there was one element, product disparagement, which introducing merit cigarettes as they did, and you find this in the reading the hearings in 1977. But the very fact that in this closed environment, and you had all of these elements, as I mentioned, coke catalyst, you had the high temperatures, and you had a moist environment, a very old hotel, and you had tanks and tanks of released freon gas. In this sense, Levangi's theory of what happened and what was actually going on in terms of the actual disease and the things that were produced was certainly important, and yet he was not given any credibility at all. And the fact is, when you put it all together, you have to come to the conclusion that we've not changed a bit. And every time there's a cruise ship that comes down with sick people, and some of them to the point that they may go home and they may die, they may actually never be analyzed. You never know what exactly it is, but the tobacco companies, in coming together, knew exactly what this phosgene theory was, and it had been identified, and Legionnaires disease had been identified. There were two things, two most important things about it: the fact that hundreds and thousands of pounds of expended freon was released into the environment was one problem for them, but the other problem was the fact that there could be not only damages to the industry, the product disparagement, perhaps, or I doubt that lawsuits in 1976, because it was very successful at the time. Until 1994, the tobacco company didn't have anything to worry about, so to speak. Well, anyway, the Bellevue Stratford. I'm looking back over my own chapter that was generated in 1992 and 3, and the concept is so interesting to me because you have the same components here. You have a distillery and a cooling tower, and you have the components. What are you dealing with? You're dealing with probably an old distillery using old freon. Who knows? Or even the new freon, which could do the same thing. You have heat. You have moisture. You have these dying workers. And it is not limited. As one doctor who he was so interested in, he was a Canadian, and a Canadian doctor who actually had the theory, as well as Lieutenant Commander Levangi. He was so convinced that nobody wanted to listen to him. And of course, it was interesting that, and again, it's not the right chemical company was Dupont, and I'm sure they want to take credit for this, because the probability of lawsuits would have been terrible at the time if anybody had ever found out anything. But our government was directly involved. The United States government was directly involved in helping the CDC to determine that this was a bacterial problem. Since the medical doctors picked it up, and the refrigerant aspect, and they determined that Legionnaires disease was extremely serious, and that in the future, defining it for themselves, Legionnaire, was important. So the doctors, in every textbook that they would read, we have cases of Legionnaires disease. Of course, it's treatable. Yes, it's treatable if you catch it in the right times. But in World War I, there were some people who got the mustard gas, which is really the component here that we're talking about, the components of what you might be looking at in the same situation where you have this moist environment this time of the year. in Scotland, and you have a distillery factory, which, when you make brew, I assume you're going to heat something, and you also have that high temperature. You have workers around there, and you have perhaps a coke catalyst if there's any kind of a coke catalyst going on. I'm not trying to make a complete picture here, but there certainly are more than just one element. There's more than one element involved in all this. The cooling tower, not in and of itself, no. The leaking cooling tower at the Legionnaires was certainly true, and the facts were that everyone, including Dupont, appeared to say, there's not going to be any crisis management here, other than we're going to make an appearance with the CDC and tell them it's the petri dish theory. It's the bacteria. Well, no one ever saw anything else, but the phosgene theory was proven. It was actually proven and accepted by the government of the United States, at least to the point that they would allow it to be printed part as a complaint and part as a confidential complaint, which, by the way, is certainly now documented and circulating. Nevertheless, what I see in Dr. McCormick's theoretic concept is that they're not really looking at just anything other than, it's an outbreak. They're focusing now as the numbers of victims come up. It's really lung damage due to the phosgene theory, the concept of freon leaking from the cooling towers. They're talking about that, but everything seems to point to a pretty good chance that the Dupont discovery of freon and the use of it, and of course other companies created it as well, was the very same thing that you have and you see in the Legionnaires disease. Unfortunately, we call it Legionnaires disease in the medical textbooks, and all the doctors treat it as Legionnaires disease. Well, that's fine. The lawyers don't have to go out there and sue anybody, but there are some people that are probably very vulnerable to that kind of thing. The statistics, the idea that now we're looking at 80 people and the number of people affected by the outbreak of this Legionnaires disease in Edinburgh, it rises to 80 or 90 or 100, and then it'll go away. It'll just go away. It's just like a cruise ship thing. Cruise ships don't change their air conditioning systems. They don't update them. And even if they did, do you suppose that there aren't the same kind of conditions or similar conditions? Because you very seldom really hear about a cluster of this kind. And that is my point. It's extremely rare, but nevertheless, it's been canonized. And it's been canonized by a bunch of fraudulent people who knew it was different. It's not a bacteria. It has nothing to do with bacteria, but it can be treated with antibiotics, and yet if those who are close to the source and die will have burnt lungs and the same effects, and that happens to be the case. Again, in concluding here, I'm going to say the chemical companies that did develop this, the foremost was Dupont, because they actually came up with the term freon, and they even put a warning on their refrigerators. Don't stick an ice pick in your refrigerator in 1933. As for any other company mentioned, they never had anything to, I don't know, of anything that they did that was related to this kind of thing. But nevertheless, that concludes my thoughts on this particular thing. If you look carefully, you're going to find more than a cooling tower issue, because there is, and there's probably a long-going conspiracy. And if there is, it goes right to the heart of G13, expanded tobacco. And maybe there's some products out there that still have this. Never know. This is Merrell Williams, and thank you.